WestJet says it is complying with federal regulations when it comes to its rebooking policies. But customers, they might disagree. Dozens of travelers whose flights were canceled after a cold snap in the prairies say WestJet refused to book them with other airlines, instead opting to rebook on their flights. But in some cases, those rebookings were up to a week after the original departure date. That's despite a regulatory obligation to rebook passengers with other airlines when no other alternative is available. Joining us now is Gabor Lukács, air passenger rights advocate. Gabor, thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon.
Your initial reaction to this, I can imagine it, but go ahead.
We have known about this issue for a long time. It is just that it didn't reach the level of public interest that it is currently having. We have seen a lot of posts about this type of issues before in our Facebook group. The obligation of an airline in the case of a genuine weather-related cancellation is to rebook the passengers on its own network or partners within 48 hours of the original departure time. And if that's not possible, then they have to rebook the passenger on a competitor's flight if that is the one which departs the fastest. So it is not just if there are no alternatives. There may be an alternative in a week. But if outside that 48-hour window, the next available flight is on Air Canada, then WestJet just has to buy an Air Canada ticket to the passenger. And that has not been happening systematically for international flights. So WestJet has been flouting the law.
Is a week, or even, I think one of them might have been 8 or 9 days, is that even believable that they couldn't find a flight earlier?
It is theoretically possible that WestJet's own flights are all full, but that is immaterial, it's irrelevant, because the law says that even if it is outside the carrier's control, the airline has to rebook the passenger as soon as possible on the flight, which gets them to their destination as soon as feasible. And if that happens to be an Air Canada flight, they just have to do it. Moreover, if the flight's cancellation or delays reason is not weather, but say a maintenance issue, then the airline has to rebook the passenger on flights of competitors that depart, unless they can rebook it on their own network within 9 hours. So that 48-hour window, it shrinks to 9 hours if the reason for a flight cancellation is within the carrier's control, like a safety issue.
What recourse do people have? I mean, if they had to wait a week for a rebooking, that's essentially if they've gone away on vacation down south. That's their vacation out the window. What can they do?
Passengers in such situations may actually go out and book a new flight at their own expense and then make WestJet or the airline which violates the law to pay for them for the extra expense. The important part is don't tell the airline that you are canceling or your booking or seeking a refund for your booking, because that can arguably be used by the airline to relieve itself from responsibility. Your position has to be, you're required to rebook me on another airline. You didn't do so, so I'm not releasing you from the obligations. I'm going to buy a ticket on a different airline, and now you will have to pay for this new expense at your expense.
But what about the vacation itself? Does WestJet have any responsibility for that if people lost a trip down south?
Well, if somebody loses a trip down south because WestJet has failed to comply with the law, then it's a breach of contract also, and then surely they're responsible for that. But generally in such situations, the preferable approach is to give WestJet a chance to fix the situation. But if they don't, then buy your own ticket. Buy a new ticket on a different airline. That's the best proof that such a flight is actually available. Fly for your vacation, and later on, once you're back, make WestJet pay for your extra expenses.
And let's quickly, before we go, WestJet, what kind of penalties are they facing for this?
WestJet could be facing very hefty penalties, but unfortunately, the federal government is not enforcing the law. The federal government could, at current law, issue $25,000 per case per violation in penalty. And in fact, Parliament authorized the federal government to have a higher threshold of $250,000 in penalty limits. But the federal government has neglected to change the penalty limits in the regulations. So there's no real appetite, unfortunately, by the federal government to enforce the law as Parliament intended. And that is part and parcel of the problem. That is the reason that WestJet and other airlines feel that they can get away with this kind of shabby corporate conduct.
Okay, Gabor, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Gabor Lukács, air passenger rights advocate.